I'm a big believer that there's not one sort of cure-all. As much as I love Vedic meditation, it's just one of the many tools that I use to continually improve myself as a human. Most of us are allocating our day to action to extract fulfillment from. But what we want to do is make sure we have a very solid starting point to our day. So for me, that is some physical exercise. That's something to make sure that my body physically is robust. Some breath work to make sure that I've got a good breath moving through my body and oxygenation of my body down to the cellular levels.
What's up, my dear friends? Welcome to the Adventures in Wellbeing podcast. My name is Damian Chaparro. And today I'm joined by Tom Cronin, a man who traded the Wall Street hustle for inner peace. He lived to tell the tale, and today he shares us with it today. 26 years ago, Tom was riding the adrenaline rush of the finance markets while his life quietly unraveled behind the scenes. He was experiencing panic attacks, depression, and had what he calls a dark night of the soul. It nearly broke him. That's when Tom discovered Vedic meditation, and it became his lifeline out of the abyss. What started as personal salvation has evolved into a global mission. He's the founder of the Stillness Project, aiming to inspire 1 billion people to meditate daily. He's authored 6 books, co-created the acclaimed film and book, The Portal, and now leads transformational retreats from Bali and soon to be aroha if enough of you ask for it. In our conversation today, we explore his journey from the trading floor to teaching meditation, the ancient practice that saved his life, and his vision for how stillness might just save our stressed out world. This is Tom Cronin on the Adventures in Wellbeing. Enjoy. All right, Tom Cronin, welcome to Adventures in Wellbeing. In getting to know you both a little bit in person and through researching for the podcast, I get the sense that you're somebody who hasn't had the flawless, charmed life with no bumps in the road. And I wanted to start by inviting you to take us back to a moment that perhaps encapsulated the process of struggle or hardship and how it is that you've moved through that in your life. Take us back to the early days of Tom Cronin.
The very early stages of my life was just so beautiful. I had a very strong Catholic upbringing on a country farm with an Irish Catholic family, 5 kids, mum and dad. And it was just really this beautiful utopian paradigm. It was a strong faith, a strong sense of God, of Jesus, a strong connection there, but also a really strong family connection as well. Beautiful, wholesome upbringing. And then I went down this path of eventually, I was originally going to go into journalism and become an advocate for change in the world, using writing as my sort of tool for transformation of the world. And I was a very strong political mind. I was traveling the world after high school, reading books by Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus, French existentialists, listening to the Smiths and Susie and the Banshees. And I was very passionate about being a sort of political advocate for the world. And then when I came back, I needed to make some money. So I decided to get a job in finance. And that was as a broker on a trading floor. And next minute, I'm swept along by the current of that industry, doing drugs and partying and drinking and making lots of money. And what had happened here was that I'd been sort of pulled into this vortex that moved me away from my North Star. And of course, everything's beautifully designed by the universe in some way, shape or form. But before I knew it, I was in this whole world that was so far from the path that I was going to be walking down. And I went deep into the industry of finance and Wolf of Wall Street type of broking. It was the same year that Wall Street came out. It was the same year which had Gordon Gekko and Bud Fox. It was the same year that Bonfire of the Vanities with Sherman McCoy, The Master of the Universe, got published. And it was the same year that Jordan Belfort, The Wolf of Wall Street, started his career. So it was the late 80s, early 90s, and it was kind of crazy times in the finance markets. But that led me down this path that eventually led to some very karmic consequences. And that was extreme anxiety, panic attacks, depression, addictions, and eventually suicide ideation. And it was in that dark night of the soul that I also came across meditation. And that was a really big paradigm shift for me. And it was Transcendental meditation or Vedic meditation that I found at that time.
Was there kind of a dark night of the soul, quite literally?
Yeah,
Or was it
absolutely.
a period of time where things shifted?
It's interesting. The universe gives us these little cues. And this is what I call in the Vedic tradition Shiva. We've got Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, these operators of evolution, Shiva being the destructive operator. And I was getting these episodes of anxiety and panic attacks, insomnia, and this sort of eating away depression that I didn't realize was happening. It's like the frog in the boiling water. It slowly morphs into its environment without realizing this is actually happening. And this had been a gradual journey over time, but it culminated in this gargantuan choiceless situation. And what happens in the Vedic understanding of these situations is that we've got Shiva chipping away, trying to inspire change, trying to be a catalyst for change. But if we ignore Shiva and we ignore those cues, and it could be an unpleasant relationship that you're in, it could be a shitty job that you're in, it could be an environment or living situation that you're in, that a location that's not relevant or a place for you to be. All of these things provide cues, and they're usually discomfort, and that's Shiva, just chipping away, giving you signals. But if we continue to ignore Shiva, what happens is we get a Rashi. And a Rashi in Sanskrit is a gargantuan event that renders you choiceless. So this is the breakthrough or breakdown moment, and that's when the relationship will either go into divorce or you up-level. It's when the business goes into bankruptcy or it up-levels. It's when you personally go into suicide or some sort of gargantuan collapse, or you up-level. And so I reached a Rashi, which was actually a particular morning in my life where I was getting ready for work. And I'd been getting these waves of anxiety and panic attacks, but not realizing or understanding what they were, just crippled with dread and fear and loathing, curled up in a ball. And this day I was getting ready for work, and I remembered that I had a huge client lunch with a large investment bank, 6 senior traders, and these lunches would go on for many hours. And I started to get this wave of panic. What if I get one of those episodes at the restaurant and I'm stuck and I can't get away? And it was like this fear of the fear that became this tsunami of fear and dread. Now, what happened at this point was my legs collapsed underneath me. My vision blurred. I couldn't see anymore. And I couldn't breathe. I had this sort of sharp pain in my chest, like a knife had gone through my heart. I had this incredible nausea, wanting to vomit. I had this incredible need to eradicate everything out of my bowels. I had this almost like blurred vision and reality of just collapsing. It was like I thought I was having a heart attack, and I thought I was dying. I literally thought I was dying at this point. But the thing was, I was so riddled with dread and self-loathing and almost hate for who I'd become, and deep, dark depression, that I remember I just didn't care at that point. It was kind of like I was hoping that this would be it. And it really was like no light at the end of the tunnel, and I was ready to go. But I got found by my wife, and she took me to the doctor, and I sat down with the doctor that morning. I remember it was in Jacks Avenue in Bondi. It's now a block of units, of course. But I remember sitting with that doctor in that clinic, and he explained to me in his words that I was having a nervous breakdown. And I'm chuckling now, but I just burst into tears. And I just couldn't stop crying. I literally thought I'd become a complete madman, and I couldn't stop crying. And I felt like the world that I'd built as this gung-ho successful broker, the facade just suddenly got shattered, and the rug that I'd built my life got ripped out from underneath me. And I really had felt like I'd lost everything, like mentally, emotionally, physically. And he sent me to immediately that morning a psychiatrist. It was a very high-level celebrity clinic in Bronte Road. Some people might know of it. It's for celebrities and very wealthy people. They go to this clinic there, mental health clinic, and he got me into an emergency session with a psychiatrist. I remember him leaning forward, and I walked in, and he had all these plaques and certificates on his wall professing how skilled he was in the area of the mind. And I remember him leaning forward. He was a very cliched psychiatrist, looked like you, actually, grey beard, and had a tweed jacket. And he said, "Look, Tom, you have to understand, you have a very stressful nature." And at that point, he prescribed medication. And so that was the starting point of the Western medicine route of me trying to find a way out of that.
And did you find that helpful? I mean, first of all, I'm really connecting with just how I think common these moments. You gave several examples of where we can be conflicted and really, get to a point that it feels a little bit crazy inside, whether it be to a relationship or your job or some aspect of life. So certainly being shown moments like that in my own life, and also connecting with people that might be in similar places now, and just still interested in, did the medication help? Was that a start that seemed valuable? Or what would you recommend to somebody who right now is feeling some level of conflict in their life and unsureness, and maybe they're not quite at that Rashi point where like it's, one or the other, but they kind of almost wish they could get to some sort of point of decision? Are there tools that we can use, I guess, outside of that starting point?
An option that is alternative routes is every day, in every moment, there's competing choices, competing preferences, options and ways to go. And if you're stubborn like me and very resistant to change, there's a saying, happiness is proportional to our ability to embrace change, and suffering is proportional to our resistance to change. And even Tim Ferriss says that people would actually rather be unhappy than change. And that's because change means fear, and fear is a greater and more uncomfortable sensation than unhappiness. It's really interesting. And that's why we will prioritize avoiding fear and preferring unhappiness, because fear is a more palpable, more uncomfortable sensation than the malaise of depression and unhappiness. It's quite interesting. So we tend to prefer unhappiness over fear, which is fear, something that can be something that we experience going through the process of change. So coming back to my situation with the recommendation from the psychiatrists and the doctors, what I found was at the time, I didn't know any other alternative. All I knew was that no one in my life, this was back in the 90s, there was no Calm apps and Headspace apps, and there was no one talking about yoga and meditation and breath work and plant medicine, mental health. There was only Western medicine. And interestingly, at that point in time, I was going down, seeing doctors, reporting in on a consistent basis to the mental health clinic to check that I was not taking my life, at the hospital there that I was reporting into, and seeing the psychiatrist. And what I found was this numbing was happening over time with these drugs. And there was something deep in my soul, and this is not to say anyone should or shouldn't take drugs for medication, for mental health, but what I found personally in my own personal experience was there was a deep knowingness that this can't be the path. There was a sense of deep misery that these people who are professionals with certificates on walls were telling me that this is the path that I have to take, which was take a medication because I'm not complete and there's something wrong with me. In the space of 3 hours, I had a doctor tell me I'm having a mental health breakdown. And then another doctor, a psychiatrist, telling me that who I am as a human being is to be stressed. That's my nature. And I need to rely on medication to support that. And there was something inherent within me knowing that there's something not right here. One thing I've learned over time, and this was 30 years ago, but since then I've learned so much more about the intelligent design within the universe, and that there's an intelligence that is guiding us, supporting us, and leading us to the right direction. If we can be a little bit more open to listening to that. And if we aren't open to listening to it, it will still come through with the signals and the messages anyway. And what happened was I was experiencing mental health leave from work, and I was sitting at home. Now, mental health leave at work in 1990s was pretty kind of horrible because there was no Netflix, there was no Spotify, there was no podcast, there was no internet. So you're watching free-to-air TV, and there was a documentary on the free-to-air TV, Channel 9, and it was 60 minutes. One of the segments was about Bruno Grollo, a very successful property developer in Melbourne and Sydney that was building high-rise buildings. And it was just about how successful he was, really. And they were doing this expose on Bruno Grollo, and there was a 2-minute segment in that 20-minute segment in 60 minutes. How he talked about, he used a particular style of meditation, and he used the word transcendental meditation. And they showed him in a suit with his eyes closed, with a tie, sitting in a chair meditating. And 3 things jumped out at me in that moment. Firstly, he looked so peaceful. And that was a million miles away from where I was being at that point in time in my life. The second thing was he wore suits and he sat in chairs to meditate. I'm like, I wear suits and I sit in chairs. I could do that. And the third thing was they used this word transcendental, which meant to go beyond. And there was something kind of like deep and powerful and appealing in that, because I'd spent the last 10 years transcending, but using ecstasy, using acid, using speed, using raves. I was really big in the rave culture and the nightclub culture and the music scene. So I loved to get out of it. I loved to transcend my reality. I didn't like my reality. I hated being a broker. I hated who I was. But this reprieve from that, by transcending that reality and getting into this escapism of the rave culture, was so powerful for me. But when I heard that in the meditation, it sounded so pure and so inviting. And so the first thing I did was, at that point in time, was pull out the yellow pages. For you young kids listening, that's Google these days. And I looked up M for meditation, and there it was, Transcendental Meditation in red. So I rang them up and went in and learned the technique. I tell you, I remember driving home that night after learning the first session. I'm like, this is what I've been looking for all my life.
Mm-hmm. And that was your first meditation experience of any kind?
Yeah.
Amazing. And it struck you right away. It's interesting how moments like that really can land, and it's crystal clear, like an insight or like a bell has gone off. I've actually never gone through the transcendental meditation route. I've actually done probably a little bit more Vedic. But
Vedic is the same, yeah. Vedic and TM are the same.
And is that first session, does that have a particular structure to it? Do you remember what that first session was like?
Yeah, very clearly. I remember the whole thing. I remember the intro talk with the teacher. I remember the training. This was 30 years ago. Mm-hmm. So we did the puja, which is the initiation. And then he shared with me the mantra. And I remember the piece. But one thing that struck me in the intro talk, which was the major hook, it was like, I'm signing up for this. The teacher said and explained the phenomenon of outcome-oriented fulfillment versus self-referred fulfillment. And he talked about how, as humans, we're designed, and it's structured in our code and construct of society, that we extract things from the external world as a source of fulfillment. So that's what we acquire or what we experience. My job, my Bitcoin, my sports team winning, new clothes, getting a haircut, meeting someone that you like. All of these things are external world experiences or acquisitions that activate some degree of up-level or fulfillment within inside of us. But the problem with this outcome-oriented fulfillment is a lot of things don't meet our expectation, or if we do get fulfillment out of that thing, it wears away quite quickly. And then we have to go to another experience or another acquisition to try and get more fulfillment. Or we're in such a stressed state when we do acquire that thing that we can't even feel fulfillment because we're so filled with cortisol and adrenaline, and the ability to produce the serotonin and oxytocin to get the fulfillment is not possible because we're so stressed, which is what was happening to me. And he talked about this self-referred fulfillment that arises from within by tapping into a source within us that isn't in the thoughts and isn't in the emotions. It's something deeper than that. It's in being itself. And so that's something that I found in that deep piece from the meditation experience, was like, this is like going home. This is
amazing. And you got it the first session. That's powerful. I think so many people have other experiences. They sit down and try and meditate, and it feels like they don't get it right. That seems so common. Do you think that was something about the student being ready, or why do you think that landed so clearly for you? And is there anything that those, who've tried a bit of meditation, but it didn't land for, is there something they can do to be open to that?
I think firstly, there's something about the student being ready. So the analogy we use in the Vedic tradition is that if you pull the arrow back in the bow, and you pull it back a little bit, and then you pull it back a little bit, you pull it back a little bit, and you pull it back further and further and further and further. This is someone waiting longer and longer, and life getting harder and harder, until eventually when they're ready, it drops in real quick, because their level of enthusiasm and level of inquiry is quite incredible and enthusiastic. So there's that component. But secondly, I think a lot of it is to do with the technique, which is why I gave up my career in finance, a very successful career, to teach this technique and bring it to the world in a big way, because it's so efficient and so effective. It stood the test of time, 10,000, well, let's just call it 5,000 to 7,000 years. It's been around and being utilized and practiced because of its efficiency, its potency, its accessibility. And I was teaching a lady a private lesson last night, and she tried and dabbled in a few different meditations, and she came out of that and she just opened her eyes and she went, wow. It was just this, she'd never felt such a quick level of peace within inside herself. And I think the power of that is the mantra. So if you're listening to bedtime stories from Matthew McConaughey on Calm app, it's going to be calming. It's definitely going to have some benefits, not to be disparaging of any other practices. But for me personally, I just found this to be deep and quick. And that was the beautiful thing about it. People want in our world today tangible, quantifiable, measurable results. And if they're not getting that, if it's uncomfortable, if it's hard, if it's going to take 5 years to get a payoff, there's just not going to be that retention and that application to their practice. And what we want is for people to find a way to slice this into their day of charm. They've got very charming lives these days. We can get Uber Eats, we can watch Netflix, we've got TikTok. So there's so much charm in our world. And to slice in practices that need to add value to their lives, they need to find a way to fit in amongst all of that charm. And I find this is a really charming practice. It's very easy to implement into our lives.
You kind of are touching on this, or at least partially touching on this modern day charm, if you will. I guess maybe another word would be kind of distraction, or, the scrolling things and the shining things and all of that. Yeah. Transcendental meditation or Vedic meditation, would it be losing its footing in a modern world because there's so much shiny, sparkly stuff? Or have you noticed that it's been updated in some way to slot in? I mean, I know that you've done some work in the digital space and have a platform that people can meditate on. So I guess that's one update. But what do you notice? Can it cut through?
Yeah, look, what I'm finding interestingly is even more uptake now than ever before. And I think this comes out of the polarity of necessity. Before, for a lot of people, meditation was a want. And I do a lot of coaching with yoga teachers, breath workers, and meditation teachers to help them position their offering from a want to a need. So we only ever buy wants or needs. That's all we're doing. So Corona beer or Coca-Cola, Netflix, they're all wants. And we will be willing to pay for something that we want. But things like a plumber is a need, or a mechanic is a need. And even internet subscription is a need these days. It's not a want anymore. So what we're finding is that, and it comes down to the message to market, the positioning for your offer, that is Vedic meditation, can be positioned as a need now. Do you have insomnia? Do you have anxiety? Are you struggling to function in the world? Are you riddled with traumas? Are you finding that you continually go into damaging relationships because of your wounds from the past? Then are you willing and open and interested in addressing that so that you can function better in the world? So it's kind of positioning, moving a little bit more from a want to a need these days. And so we're seeing quite a high uptake.
Analogy, isn't it? It's like in general society, as we kind of move away and we're seeing increasing levels of anxiety and depression, and that's that arrow being pulled back. That's basically the same thing, isn't it? Yeah. I think I see that in retreats. And I was just at the Wellness Tourism Summit and was looking at different statistics. And they were talking about how people are moving more towards wellness away from fitness. And I was kind of surprised at that stat, but it also, I think, is also aligned with that same analogy that it's great to look good in the mirror and to make sure you have a six pack. But if you're depressed and anxious and, unhappy with your life, like, it feels a little more urgent, that there's something underneath that needs repair. And so, I guess it's positive to see that there are resources, like yours and your retreats and other methods for shifting our state.
Yeah, I'm really excited for particularly people like yourself and aroha. It's as we evolve as a species, and we're seeing exponential levels of growth as a species, going from what we call in Sanskrit the karmakan level, the gross level, that's the dense world. So traditionally, fitness was a big thing because we focused on the body. Whereas now, as we evolve as a species, we're starting to integrate and appreciate the importance of having, now the big thing is obviously mental health, but what we will evolve in even further beyond that eventually will be spiritual health and spiritual awareness, and the integration of the mind, the body, and spirituality as a full holistic approach to what it is to have an optimized human experience before, the optimal human experience was make sure that you got a six pack and you're a certain weight and, you're a certain waistband. But then we went into now at the moment we're at mental health and physical health. So that's wellness. And then what we will start to look at beyond that into the next wave after that will be a whole spiritual awakening. And that's why we're seeing a cusp of that, which is meditation, plant medicine, Qigong, Reiki becoming more prolific as well. And it's really interesting. What I'm seeing is a really big shift very quickly where people are allocating their funds and their time into ways for that to happen in their life. So one of the biggest bar and nightclub owners in LA has sold all his businesses and is now setting up health retreats with Anthony Robbins, a business called The Estate. So if you just Google The Estate in LA, and these are in $35,000 annual memberships, but it's, high-end breathwork, saunas, ice baths, all the healthy stuff, because the smart money is realizing that as people evolve, their way of spending their time and their money is going to change as well. A friend of mine was telling me that they went somewhere and there was just no one there. It was like a big sort of bar area. And it was just, it was Vegas actually. They were down in Vegas and they said the streets were like empty. It was just, and you think Vegas in another 10, 15 years time, they're going to have to think about how they're going to reconvert all of those casinos into something else. And it could be spa centers, health clubs, yoga centers, or else they're going to be just condos with people living in them, because people will dramatically and quite quickly change the way they spend their money and their time.
I'm reflecting on the idea that, we could as a society, move slow and steady where the fitness gym turns into the wellness club. And like we, one by one sort of come across the bridge, if you will, and have a shift in consciousness. But you were also using this Rashi where there's this like dark night or dark moment or something that then creates this kind of pivot, almost like the arrow being released, right? And that there can be these, I guess, moments of great intensity that move towards great shift. And I wonder if our society won't, as a whole, do something like that. I don't know. Sometimes some of the things that keep me up at night, are really looking at the direction that the world is going. And I go, oof, wow, spicy, and how is all this going to play out? And, it seems like it'd be incredible if humanity was wise enough and evolved enough not to run at the cliff or run at the wall in order to have a sort of sharp awakening. But it also seems, at least partially, our nature to have to suffer massively in order to wake up,
I have a lot of people really quite concerned about where the world's at. And it's easy when we watch media to think that we're on the cliff about to walk off it. And that's definitely the case. We are very much on that cliff and we're very close to termination of a species, not to scare anyone, but it's a high probability that we may well struggle to continue on for another 100 years as a species. There's many headwinds that we're facing, and I'm good friends with a CEO of a large fund that invests in existential risk to humanity. And he sees that there are four major risks to humanity. There are sort of another 5 or 6 sort of peripheral risks to humanity, but the four ones, the biggest one is AI, and then we've got nuclear, and then we've got environmental, and then we've got lack of consciousness. We're actually getting dumber, and we're getting dumber very quickly. And so it's really quite fascinating how this is happening. But simultaneously, at the same time, it's really quite fascinating. What's also happening simultaneously is exponential levels of conscious awakening, like we've never seen before. The plant medicine, the yoga, the breath work, the arohas of the world. This is a rapid acceleration of awakening and wisdom and sense prevailing happening on the planet at the same time. And so the analogy I like to use is it's kind of like watching a game of rugby, and it's 22-all with 3 minutes to go. And one side's going to win. We don't know which one it's going to be. And it's a nail biter. And we're all sort of sitting in the bleachers or in the stadium. And if you're on a team, this is not the time to throw in the towel and say, this is hopeless. What a horrible world we live in. We're all going to die. No, this is the time when the best players play their best game. And so this is the call to action, that if you have any inkling of making some positive impact in the world, and it doesn't mean you have to set up a business or run a retreat center, it could mean that you just simply embody loving kindness on a daily basis. help that lady cross the road, pay for someone's coffee, speak kind words, be a good human. So every single person, their contribution is what they do, what they say, what they think on a daily basis. That's all there is to it, multiplied by 8 billion people. And that's going to determine which way we go. It's really quite interesting.
And if somebody were listening now and they were kind of feeling, I get that there are kind of two ways to be with this world of risk, right? That there's one that feels kind of powerless and anxious and frozen. And then there was this other space of igniting and feeling empowered, and this difference between the two in the face of the same risk, right? Is there something that you use, or is there a Vedic practice that we could even maybe taste of right now that helps you to recenter when you notice, you're leaning one way rather than the other?
I'm a big believer that there's not one sort of cure-all. As much as I love Vedic meditation, it's just one of the many tools that I use to continually improve myself as a human. And that's an ongoing journey. There's plenty of me to go, so don't worry, I'm not there yet. But most of us are allocating our day to action to extract fulfillment from. But what we want to do is make sure we have a very solid starting point to our day. So for me, that is some physical exercise. That's something to make sure that my body physically is robust. Some breath work to make sure that I've got a good breath moving through my body and oxygenation of my body down to the cellular level. So some simple breath work, and you can just look up Wim Hof breath or conscious breathing. There's plenty of YouTube videos out there. Some journaling, reading some positive books. Most people are waking up, looking at the media and getting a cup of coffee. So we really want to be discerning about the start to our day and make sure that that foundation for action is built on something really solid. So if we build a house, we don't want to build a house until we've got a solid slab. So making sure that the start of every single day is started with intention, started with positivity, started with foundation of gratitude, of stillness, of meditation, movement, and then finishing the day. What does your end of day look like? Is it just sitting on your TikTok and scrolling through that, looking at dumb memes, or is it something more meaningful? Gratitude for the day, finishing with some meditation, some gentle breath, some stretching. All of these things, it doesn't take much. Just slightly tweak our day, just slightly tweak the attention to certain things that are going to really provide stability, sense of recalibration, resetting from all the buffering and the influences and the machinations of life. For a simple practice.
So agree with you.
Yeah.
I really notice, even at aroha, the number of times that I have stepped into a yoga class or, stepped back into some practice to kind of have this deep aha again that, oh, I was only that far away from that change of consciousness, It's like, how many times do I have to have that experience to really get it? But really everything you put in, moment by moment, just paying attention to the quality of what it is that you are giving your body from nutrition, like you said, through to movement, through to, what you're reading and what you're doing with your mind is just massive.
One thing I find really helpful, because we have very cerebral lives, so we're listening to podcasts, we're reading emails, we're talking, we're listening. We're very top heavy. So one thing that people can do just to really help ground them is to sit on the floor in your lounge room or on the earth, put your legs out in front of you, put your back up against a wall or the sofa. So now you've created an L frame, your back and your legs. And then you put your arms from your shoulders down onto your knees. So you've got an A frame because you're putting your arms out onto your knees. And then for 10 minutes, you're going to slide your attention out of your head, down into your buttocks, pressing into the floor, and just simply bring awareness to the buttocks pressing into the floor. You'll feel the pressure point of the two butt cheeks and the two bones pressing the butt cheeks into the floor. Keep your attention there for 10 minutes. Now, the mind will get a little bit bored of this, but what's happening, it's like a toothpaste tube being upside down, squeezed down. We're getting out of our heads, and what we're doing, we're grounding into the root chakra. And we're not going to be doing the whole red circles of the chakras or anything like that. We're just simply putting the attention on the butt cheeks, pressing into the floor. And that will be really grounding and calm the nervous system and calm the body. And you'll be amazed at how quickly that will bring you into a nice state of calm.
And talk to me a little bit about mantra, how it works, why it works. What is that mechanism about?
Yeah, we use particular resonances or frequencies called Bij mantras, B-I-J-A. Bij mantra is a very specific mantra, different from something like Om Namah Shiva or Om Mani Padme Hum. These are mantra-based mantras, so that we would do mantra meditation with the japa beads as we go through each mantra. But with Bij mantras, these are for transcending, and they have a beautiful quality about them to lure the mind away from the charm and stimuli of the external world and take the mind into the subtle and to the silent. The mind won't naturally gravitate there. The mind was always going to the most stimulating and most excitable places. So that's why it likes worry, it likes regret, it likes guilt, shame, anger, because they're more palpable, more stimulating. So we need a vehicle mantra, and that mantra has two beautiful effects. Firstly, it's very charming for the mind, so it soothes the mind through the repetition. But if we're repeating that effortlessly as a resonance, what's happening is a process called entrainment, where we're synchronizing the brain from beta brainwave, which is like that, down into delta brainwave. And we're going to influence the mind state through the repetition of that resonance of the mantra. And by default, we're going to synchronize the brain to the delta frequency of the mantra, which puts the brain by default into a delta brainwave frequency, which is a meditation.
So do you still use the same mantra that you were first given?
So what would happen is the student would have that mantra that they first get initiated with for usually around 5 to 6 years, depending on how consistent they are with their practice. But if they've been going to multiple retreats and using that on a daily basis, then we would suggest after about 4, 5, 6 years that they would then explore what's called an advanced mantra, which will be a longer version of their existing mantra. So they'll stick with their core existing mantra and then get an extension to that mantra, which the first stage of the meditation will give us a vertical experience that's going deep. And then the second stage with the advanced mantras gives us a broad experience going wide. So now we get more of an omnipresent, universal type experience that we wouldn't normally recommend until they've had plenty of time experiencing the depths of meditation before the width or breadth of meditation.
It's a little trickier to get to that breadth, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so Transcendental is a subset of Vedic. Is that right?
No, I would say they're actually side by side, same. So you've got TM, which is exactly the same practice as VM. But from what I have been led to believe, that in the 90s, the TM organization wanted to run political parties. And you could actually vote for the political party in Australia that we'll call the Natural Law Party. So we have the House of Reps, a big white piece of paper. We have the Shooters Party, the Smokers Party, the Fishermen's Party, and then also was a box where you could vote for the Natural Law Party.
Well, that's cool.
And to fund that process, they were looking to run sort of political campaigns to promote meditation. And my teacher at the time was asked to contribute to that process. All the teachers were, and he was not very enthusiastic about that. He just didn't think it was a good pathway. And in hindsight, he was right. He didn't think the world was ready for that. And it was asking the teachers, who are really sole operators, and this is our business, to fund that approach. And so by not funding it, he was then asked to leave the organization. And so there was a bit of a split happened. From there, the same technique was basically given a different name, but just a different community. So they've got Transcendental meditation, Vedic meditation, same technique, same pujas, same mantras. Just one's not allowed to call it TM for some worldly political stuff.
I didn't realize that. So Vedic meditation, in a sense, was born in Australia.
That's
from
right,
your
yeah.
teacher.
That's right, yeah.
And that's Tom Knowles.
Knowles.
Wow, I didn't know that. What an interesting piece of history. That's incredible.
Yeah. Even in meditation circles, if anyone knows the Bhagavad Gita is two warring tribes, where you've got these two cousins, and one of them wants to take over the land and the other one wants to prevent that. And so they have this clash happening. And it's the very classic Bhagavad Gita story that many of us will be living out in our lives in divorces and business situations. And, when any friends of mine are going through difficult times, they say, I'm living a Bhagavad Gita story right now. And so even in the Vedic meditation and Transcendental meditation, there was a bit of the Bhagavad Gita living itself out with some, I guess, not necessarily warring tribes, but certainly a split happening in the community.
Walk us through what happens on retreat with you. What does a Vedic meditation retreat look like?
Yeah, it's very intense in some respects. I don't sugarcoat it. My intention is to get people out the other side of that retreat completely transformed. Not completely, because there's always transformation to be happening in our lives. It's an ongoing process, but to have deep transformation, that's healing a lot of deep traumas, clearing a lot of stresses out of the body, and also upgrading their minds into a whole new way of operating. We go through a number of different methodologies for that to take place. We use as a core of the retreat what's called rounding, and it's a 4-limb sequence that we do throughout the day, and it incorporates 20 minutes of some gentle yoga poses, 5 minutes of some alternate breathing called pranayama, and then a meditation, and then for 20 minutes, and then lying down in shavasana for 10 minutes. So we'll do multiple rounds throughout the day, which plays a really integral role on putting the mind and body and nervous system into deeper levels of physiological rest to allow a lot of really deep healing happening. And then for me, my retreats, I do a lot of workshops that are quite challenging and confronting, but really help break down the calcification and rigidity of the personality, because it's our personality that we're clinging to and are holding on to that gets sort of really encrusted in us. So helping, I guess, some crumbling of that allows the new version of themselves to start to emerge out of that.
And those come in forms of, 2 or 3 lectures a day. Are people in silence during those retreats?
We find the silence limits the ability for stress to come out. So just things like talking and crying and laughter and all sorts of other movement activities really help facilitate that physiological releasing. I found, as beautiful as they are, silent retreats, and there's so much beauty about that. The challenge I find with them is that for people who are just starting, I've got people starting this Saturday on this retreat that have never meditated before. They've never done any clearing before. So their body's riddled with these stresses. And the releasing of stresses is a very physiological process. We have some screaming exercises. People will be crying, people will be moving, and all sorts of other things. So this allows the physiological releasing of that stress that's being dormant in the body to come out. So the silent retreats can suppress that to some respects, and it's very difficult for it to find an exit point if there's no ability for the expression of that to come out.
I noticed that when you were talking about your morning or a morning and evening practice, there was kind of a mix of different practices in there. Are your retreats kind of strictly a Vedic path, or do you kind of mix and pull from what you've learned?
Yeah, I pull in other things. We do some breathwork sessions, some conscious breathwork, and we do a water ceremony down at the waterfall. So it's a bit of a blend, but a lot of it is, the core of it will be the Vedic grounding. And then, I bring in a lot of workshops and transformational exercises that I've picked up from around the world on my travels.
I noticed that you kind of bridge 2 worlds. If meditation is stilling the mind, what is it that stirs the mind? It's often craving and wanting to create or be someone or develop something or, build a business and kind of do this whole other thing. Talk to me a little bit about how you balance those 2 aspects. I know you teach with corporates. You kind of help people to build conscious businesses. It seems like you straddle that quite well.
Yeah, a lot of people have this, I guess, an ideology which needs a little bit of correcting. We call this pragyaparad, a mistake of the intellect, where they believe that if you meditate, you shouldn't do anything. But what's going to happen, and Oprah Winfrey, she has this beautiful quote as she does Vedic meditation or Transcendental meditation. She says, the constancy of stillness. It is only from that space can you create your best work and your best life. Now, it doesn't make sense. It's like stillness and best work, best life. How does that work? So what happens when we quieten the mind and we go into deep meditation? What happens is we get out of the limited framework of the thinking mind, which is a very limited realm. We have a very tight perimeter of where our thoughts, it's like goldfish in a goldfish bowl. And they're just going around in this little circle. There's very limited variance in our thoughts on a day-to-day basis. If we took an Excel spreadsheet, or we took our 40,000 thoughts and put it into that spreadsheet and we check that against each day, we'd find there's so much overlap from day to day because our thoughts don't move far from center. But when we transcend that thinking mind, which is codes and constructs of our society and generational upbringing, what happens is we enter the field of mind, which is the field of mind where all potential and all creativity exists. And now, as the mind expands into the field of mind, so the phone has an operating system in it, but that's not the gift of the phone. The gift of the phone is it can access the information that the phone is in. The phone's in the information field. So I'm in Venezuela or Antarctica or Bali or Sydney or Queenstown, the phone is able to access all that information that the phone is in. And so we are in the field of mind. We are in the field of mind of all potential or creativity, but not this mind. That's very limited. This mind, that's expansive. So when we drop into stillness, it's not an empty, dull, inert place. It's a place bursting with all potential. And so what we get are incredible epiphanies, and basically our mind and our body, when we really get into the depths of what this is all about, this mind and body is the conduit for the divine to express form from. So books, films, businesses, shape a glass and make a pen and create a little adapter for your headphones. All of the things are created from the field of infinite possibility. So on our retreats, we finish with this beautiful session of knowing that everything that's ever going to be created in that field is in it right now. So everything that is ever going to be created, whether it's a retreat center on the edge of a lake, or whether it's a biro pen that hasn't been built yet, or whether it's a three-dimensional AI created, home, then that is in that field right now. So what we want to start accessing that field, because what happens when we start meditating, be careful, because you're going to start getting downloads every single day of infinite potential wanting to express itself through the portal of your mind and body. And you surrender that to the field and let yourself become the custodian of that information flow. And then you'll never be bored ever in your life again, because you'll have so much creativity wanting to express itself into the world. And so I do a lot of my work is to help people to express that and build businesses out of it.
I was just researching the effects of AI, and an MIT study just came out, and they were talking about how the way that we use ChatGPT really matters, whether we think first and then layer in the support of AI versus just going to ChatGPT and kind of outsourcing all the logic and all the thinking and all the creativity and, all those layers first, and just kind of copy paste out of it, and the sort of cognitive debt that you get from doing that. And I was having this thought, I was like, what is the difference between sitting in meditation and offloading all my thinking to AI? My brain was kind of trying to figure that out. It actually creates a vastly different experience, right? Like exactly what you were saying. When we meditate, we are tapping into a space that opens up creativity, that supports a deeper connection, of course, to the moment, but also this kind of deeper well of information. And they can see it in our brainwaves, and they can see it in the way the brain functions. I kind of imagined, like, what if you kind of created a rule for yourself every time you use AI? You think about what you need to think, you write what you need to write, like let your brain do some of the laps around the thinking track, create what you're going to create. And then when you go to create your prompt, right as you hit enter, you kind of let yourself drop into a state of awareness and spend whatever amount of time in meditation, and kind of layer in meditation with this kind of creative path, as a practice. It's an interesting world we live in, for sure.
Absolutely. We're right on the cusp of, I think, something so big with AI. What's beyond that next 10, 20, 30 years is uncharted waters, that's for sure.
Yeah, indeed. Tom, what is it that you want for us all? What is it that you want for the world?
I had a session at Aroha. I want to share this with you. I was just so high, like I was just peaking. And I just was like, if I was to be able to do an audit today in the last 24 hours of how much money on the planet we spent as a 7.9 billion people on alcohol, on recreational drugs, and on clothes that we don't need to buy. So if we were to work out the sum of the 24 hours of expenditure on those three things, because the only reason we're spending money on those three things is to get some degree of fulfillment, some degree of making life better. And then I just been sitting there for 30 minutes lying there, and all I did was put oxygen in and out of my body. Oxygen in and carbon dioxide out. And I was like, wow, I was so high. We really are a dumb species.
Totally, yeah.
It doesn't take much. So my main intention is to help people understand that with some very, very simple practices, less thinking, so meditation, a little bit more breathing, some oxygenation of the body, some breath work, a little bit of movement, so go to the gym or do some exercise 3 to 4 times a week, and then do some stretching because you need to stretch, drink more water, eat some better food. It's really uncomplicated. It's really simple what we can do as a species to have the optimal human experience. And yet what we're doing is actually the antithesis of all of that. And what excites me is that there's enough openness and interest and curiosity from enough people in the world at this point in time to start a movement, to be part of a shift that's already happening. And you are playing an integral role in that. So exciting. The session I was in at Aroha, the group I was with, there was 8 people from Arizona. So, it's amazing how far your reach is and how exciting I was to see how many people are looking to make differences in their lives. So my motivation is to get more people meditating, predominantly more than anything.
Thanks for all the work you're doing. Really appreciate you, brother. And thank you for giving us some of your time today.
My pleasure. It's great to have a chat, and always good to be in your company, Dame. You're doing great things in the world.
Cheers, brother. Appreciate it. Okay, my friends, thanks so much for tuning in to the Adventures in Wellbeing. Follow us on any platform you enjoy listening on. And remember, sometimes maybe the most radical thing we can do is just to slow down, to sit, to tune in, and to let go. Much love.